Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone here to the October 1st, 2024 PM Board of Supervisors meeting. And before we go ahead and call this meeting to order, our first order of business is we have our Citizens Forum, where any citizen can come up and speak for 3 minutes on any item that is not currently on the agenda. And we'll keep the Citizens Forum open till 7:30. When you come to the podium, if you would, please state your name and magisterial district for the record. If you'd like to come and speak on any matter that's not on the agenda, you can raise your hand and I'll call you to the podium. At this time, we'll go ahead and open up the Citizens Forum. In the back, Mr. Haight.
Good evening, Supervisor. Good evening, Supervisor Bates and the rest of the members of the board. Supervisors, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight. I think it's a great idea for the Board of Supervisors to give our Sheriff Department the ability to move forward for using drones to better do their job and protect our citizens. It's the Board of Supervisors' job to protect the health, wealth, and safety of our citizens, which also includes citizens' ability to use their property in compliance with the current zoning rules and regulations. Property rights, land rights, and buy rights are synonymous and should be treated the same. You can't take away our buy rights and tell us you're supporting property rights. Our Board of Supervisors have preached to us for the last 8 years that individuals' property rights and use that to approve industrial solar power plants on industrial land with no infrastructure. This board also used the individual property rights argument that approved industrial data centers on agricultural land without the proper infrastructure to support them as well. You can't take away property rights from us it reduces our property values while making decisions that could increase your property values. Your job as Board of Supervisors is to protect the health, wealth, and safety of the residents of Culpeper County. Myself, as well as other Stevensburg residents, are victims of the decisions of the Board of Supervisors. Our property values have been reduced by up to 25%, according to some estimates, because of solar, not considering the safety and health and overall welfare and inconvenience associated with them. Now you are telling us that we no longer have property rights and buy rights unless you grant them to us. You have transferred your role as that of a king or monarch. Quote, monarchy is a political system in which supreme authority is vested in the monarch and individuals, rulers who function as heads of state. It typically acts as a political administrative organization and as a social group of nobility known as court society. You want to make yourself a court society. You want to grant property rights to those you deem worthy. You want to pick and choose who you want to have rights. Culpeper residents won't be silent. Now we know why you haven't scheduled public engagement meetings to discuss these zoning changes that the Rules Committee wants to impose on us. Now we are finally knowing the reason why you are afraid to have town hall meetings. Public input needs to be for all of these changes. You need to schedule public engagement meetings like you did with the comprehensive plan. These zoning changes affect the entire county and everyone's input is needed. David Lee is the only Board of Supervisors that has had town hall meetings this year. Property rights are human rights and you can't separate them from each other. Thank you again for your opportunity and as always, keep Culpeper safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haight. Is there anyone else who'd like to come up and speak on an item that is not on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the Citizens Forum. And moving on to item 3.0, approval of the agenda. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda? Hearing none, we'll proceed on as presented. Our next item, 4.0, our special presentation. Tonight we have the distinct honor of recognizing a gentleman who has given a great deal of his life to Culpeper County. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our county administrator to introduce this item and ask Mr. Tom O'Halloran if he would meet me at the podium.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, members of the board. At this morning's AM meeting, the board did adopt a resolution of appreciation in honor of Thomas O'Halloran, and I'd like to read that resolution into the record this evening. Whereas Thomas O'Halloran has recently announced that he is stepping down from the Board of Directors of the Culpeper Soil and Water Conservation District, a board on which he has served since 2007. And whereas Mr. O'Halloran served initially as Vice Treasurer for his first year and then became Treasurer, a position he has held continuously through the present. And whereas Tom's commitment to the betterment of the community and especially to the agricultural industry in unparalleled ways as evidenced by his service on all of the following committees and commissions: the Rappahannock River Basin Study Commission, the Culpeper Agricultural and Forestal Districts Advisory Committee, the Culpeper Economic Development Advisory Committee, the Cooperative Extension Leadership Council, the Virginia Farm Direct Marketing Association, the Virginia Christmas Tree Growers Association, and the National Christmas Tree Growers Association. And whereas he served as the chairman at some point on nearly all of those committees and commissions, and whereas Tom has given countless hours of service in the interest of conservation and agriculture throughout our region, demonstrating his unwavering commitment, which has been truly remarkable. And whereas Mr. O'Halloran's Glengarry Farm is a beloved location in the community, and it even supplied the state capitol Christmas tree at the governor's mansion in 2002. And whereas Tom is well known throughout the county and the region as a man of the highest character and one who is always smiling and has a kind word, now therefore be it resolved that the Culpeper County Board of Supervisors hereby wish to recognize the many contributions of Mr. Thomas O'Halloran on the occasion of his stepping down from the Culpeper Soil and Water Conservation District Board of Directors, and express their sincere appreciation for his dedication to conservation and agriculture and to the citizens of Culpeper County, presented this first day of October 2024.
Thanks again, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Moving on to item 5.0, general county business, there is none. So item 6.0, planning commission business, and these will require public hearings. First up is 6.01. At this, I would ask Mr. Drumheller and Mr. McLaren to introduce this item.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'll read a letter from the Planning Commission. Dear Chairman Bates, the Board of Supervisors will consider a request by Generation 2 LLC, Juanita Miller, for a special use permit to allow construction and operation of a contractor's office and warehouse with outdoor storage, including truck and equipment parking. The proposed use is within the Entrance Overlay Corridor District, and Article 30-3-2.2 requires this use to acquire a special use permit in accordance with this article. The property is zoned HI, heavy industrial, and is located on 1529 James Madison Highway, with the proposed entrance on Joan Drive in the Stevensburg Magisterial District. It's found on Tax Map 34, Parcel 8F. This case was considered by the Planning Commission after proper advertising and public hearings held on Wednesday, September 11th, 2024. The Planning Commission found the request to be in conformance with Article 30-3-2.2 of the zoning ordinance. Upon motion duly carried, the Planning Commission recommends to the Board of Supervisors by a 9-0 vote that the proposed use permit be approved with the following conditions of approval. And there are three. The proposed use of outdoor storage shall be limited to areas depicted on as outdoor storage areas as shown on the overall layout plan dated May 13th, 2024 by Carter Run Consulting. Number two, the proposed use shall not commence operations until a site plan in accordance with Article 20 of the zoning ordinance has been approved. And number three, the storage of inoperable or junk vehicles shall be prohibited. Sincerely, Sanford Reeves, Jr.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. The case that Neil just read into the record there that is being reported to you by the Planning Commission, the property that we're looking at is shown on the screen in front of you there. This is an aerial image from a couple years ago already. But it should be familiar to the board. We looked at this property here not too many months ago, a similar request. It is a separate piece of property. The property that they got a conditional use permit on previously and are working through a site plan on now. A similar use, a garage-type building, metal building, office building with some outdoor storage. This is actually a separate piece of property that this landowner has. It's actually zoned differently as well. It's zoned heavy industrial. And this use is allowed by right, but because it's along Route 29, just right here, the entrance corridor overlay for any outdoor storage component does require a special use permit. That's why the applicant is going through this process. They do have an outdoor storage component for truck parking and equipment parking for this proposed, on this piece of property. They're highlighted in red as well. Planning Commission reviewed it and has recommended approval. As you heard Neil read into the record, they also reviewed the architectural review submission for the actual building and recommended a certificate of appropriateness in their capacity as the Architectural Review Board last month as well. So that has all been set, that stage has been set for that. And tonight is just a special use permit hearing for the outdoor storage component. There were 3 conditions that Neil read into the record that the Planning Commission recommends. Those were vetted by the applicant. The applicant's representation, I believe, is here tonight as well if you have further questions for him. But the applicant was comfortable, Mr. Chairman, with those conditions of approval that the Planning Commission recommended as well. Staff has no objections to the request. It's fitting with the zoning that's there. It's fitting with the area character that we have, and it's nice to see some industrial property be used for industrial purposes.
Thank you, Sam. Neil. Any questions for staff? Hearing none, if the applicant is here, if he would like to come up and good evening.
Good evening. My name is Darren Smith with Carter Run Consulting. I'm a representative for the applicant on this project. As Neil and Sam have introduced this, they've explained it well. I'm not sure what else I can add at this point. We do agree with the conditions that are imposed on this, and that's not going to be an issue for the use or what they want to do on it. Other than that, if you have any other questions, I'm here to answer them.
Thanks, sir. Any questions for the applicant?
All for getting to the public hearing.
All right, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Thank you, sir. Go ahead and open the public hearing for anyone who would like to come up and speak on this matter. If you would raise your hand, and I'd call you to the podium. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and open this back up for discussion or a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the draft resolution as posted for case U 2247-24-1.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Carries 6-0, Ms. Ellis. All right, moving on to item 6.02, proposed amendment to the zoning ordinance ZTA-11-24-1. And again, we'll ask Mr. Drumheller and Mr. McLaren to introduce these items.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. The Board of Supervisors will consider a revision to Appendix A, zoning ordinance of the County Code, Article 6C, Commercial Services District, specifically Article 6.1C-2, Use Regulations for this district. Proposed revisions would limit the residential uses in the CS district, specifically restricting residential uses to 25% of the total acreage of the lot, not including mixed-use structures. The board will determine whether the proposed ordinance amendment is necessary to further the goals, general purpose of promoting health, safety, or general welfare of the public, and other purposes found in the Code of Virginia, Section 15.2, 2283, and 2285. This amendment was considered by the Planning Commission after proper advertising and public hearing held on Wednesday, September 11th, 2024. Planning Commission determined that this amendment is not required to serve the public necessity, convenience, general welfare, and good zoning practices required by Virginia Code, Section 15.22286A7. Upon motion duly carried, the Planning Commission recommends to the Board of Supervisors by a 7-2 vote that the proposed zoning text amendment is not adopted. Sincerely, Chairman Sanford Reeves, excuse me.
Mr. Chairman, highlighted on the screen is the language in red that the Planning Commission has forwarded. As you heard, Neil, they're not recommending adoption of this language, but this was referred back to the Planning Commission recently for further consideration and in a way to look at limiting residential or potential residential uses on undeveloped commercial properties. Just as a reminder, we have 3 commercial zoning districts. This touches just one of them at this point as a recommendation. CS zoning, which is our commercial services zoning district, by and large our biggest zoning district where we have multiple properties. The other 2 zoning districts are not or would not be impacted by any proposed amendments at this point. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to read that section there, but this is the section that was advertised that on board docs is forwarded by the Planning Commission. Basically, that section highlighted in red, section C 6.1C-10-2, and then the following section would be new sections in the code if adopted or moved forward by the board. And basically states that the total acres dedicated to only residential uses shall be at most 25% of the total acreage of the entire development. Buildings that have both residential dwelling units and commercial uses will not have this land count towards this limit, so basically mixed use structures. Additionally, no residential units shall be on the first floor of any mixed use structure. This limit does not negate the lot area, width, setback, or yard requirements and water or sewer requirements where applicable of the R district or appropriate R district. The spot there, this -3, the second sentence there, is a qualifier for that restricted residential use. And that states that residential only structures and or uses shall not receive a certificate of occupancy until there is at least one properly permitted commercial or mixed use structure and or that use has received a certificate of occupancy. So not only does this proposed amendment potentially restrict the total acres of a commercial zoning CS piece to 25% of a residential use, but it does have a qualifier as well where you can't have that residential use until you have either concurrently with a commercial use or a mixed use structure. And that's how it's presented moving forward to the Board of Supervisors. Mr. Chairman, I know many questions have come up along the way. We did advertise this not only in the paper, but we did send out each owner that zoned CS today did get a notice, and we fielded inquiries in our office. I know the Board of Supervisors has as well along the way. I'll be happy to entertain any questions to that light. I know there may be a movement or concern, and I'm happy to elaborate on those too that we've received. One that I'll kick off with, and then I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman, is the existing homes that we do have. There is a contingent of homes that are there today, single family, that are zoned CS. There's a large contingent compared to the overall list of lots that were presented in 3 flags. By and large, the subdivision itself is not zoned CS, but there's a section towards 29 that is, and it occupies several lots. There's concern with those single-family homes, if this were adopted as is in its current form, something were to happen to the home or they wanted to do an addition to their home, staff would have to use Article 12, which is our zoning ordinance for non-conforming uses, because at that point they potentially would be non-conforming if there's not a commercial use on the property. And in that way they would have to, for example, if a fire went through the house, they would have 2 years to build that home. They could build it in kind, couldn't be bigger. But the other thing that there are limiting factors in the non-conforming ordinance that also talks to expansion. And expansions are prohibited. So if someone wanted to do an addition to their home, the way staff has interpreted Article 12 in its current form, they would not be able to do an addition to their home. So I know that those concerns are stated and the public can address that further as they've been invited to do tonight as well. But I know that was one concern and staff is happy to continue to work on that issue, Mr. Chairman, as the board sees fit.
Thank you, Sam. Neil, questions for staff? Comments?
And I do have one comment with what those have been brought to light about the fact that, Sam, what is the best way to ensure that if we do move forward with this, that those wouldn't have to be non-conforming and could be just utilized as the residential uses that they are?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, the Supervisor Gugino, the board does have multiple options to try to move on that front if that's a concern of the board. One, you could make amendments to Article 12. That's not staff's recommendation. By and large, we feel like Article 12, our non-conforming ordinance, works well, actually. And I think there could be some other unintended consequences with amending that code further. Probably the preferred option in the Three Flags case, and maybe one other subdivision that's partially zoned commercial services as well behind 7-Eleven on Route 29. I think it's Hawthorne Estates, at least it used to be called that when it was created. In those particular situations, I think the best move for the board may be to do a map amendment to actually have those properties not be commercial, but actually be residential, because they're currently used residential and they're inside an actual subdivision, a residential subdivision. Those zoning lines were created in the 1980s. And at that point, the one on 29 probably a little bit longer than that, but Three Flags, I believe, was a rezoning action in the 1980s. It did not get changed because the developer did not have to, because we allowed single-family homes in the CS zoning. A map amendment would be appropriate potentially for those areas. We could look at further language changes here, grandfathering type language. Again, I believe that could get tricky because there are other isolated incidences, for example, in Brandy Station, where they're not in the subdivision, but there's a house. It's zone CS. It has been for a long time. And we do have in those opportunities where a hybrid use may make sense. In those cases, it gets a little trickier. Or you can leave it as is. That's another option too. Today, the CS zoning allows for residential uses, and I know that's not the direction that the board had the planning commission refer back to, but that is another option too.
Thank you.
Sam, do you know how many homes are on lots of less than an acre, zoned CS, that are not in a major division, so excluding Hawthorne Estates and Three Flags?
Excluding those two, the only ones that we could discover this afternoon a little bit further were out in Brandy Station, and there's a handful.
There's also the ones on 229
Yeah.
that Morris Peters used to own. There's also the ones, or one of the two that, I'm not going to name the owner, that's the old restaurant on 29.
Yeah.
There are.
There are a handful around that do have a, and those are not in a subdivision, so they're a little bit unique. And I don't think, and Supervisor Underwood, I don't mean to cut you off, but I don't believe, in my opinion, that a map amendment would be appropriate necessarily in those situations.
So essentially, the owners of those properties, if they chose to expand or in any way alter their residential structures, they could not do so unless they requested rezoning.
If the ordinance goes forward as submitted or as proposed currently, there is a chance through that non-conforming that you could not expand that residential use.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman. Sam, so what's, just for clarity, repeat again what the impact is to the homeowners if the ordinance stays the same and we do not pass the amendment?
Supervisor Deal, if the ordinance remains as today, there would be no impact because that use is allowed as a by right use, residential uses. So someone could continue that use, expand that use further if they saw fit, as long as it met the other zoning criteria as far as setbacks and things like that. So if this moves forward where it restricts residential development, then that would be a concern moving forward for those homes that exist today if they wanted to expand or needed to replace their home.
Sam, something that's very concerning to me is the fact that a homeowner who might not be fully aware of what his zoning is when he bought this house in a subdivision and something happens, or say, for instance, he wants to put an in-law suite on his house.
Right.
And at that point, the only way he's going to be able to do that is use the non-conforming ordinance or have a rezone. And I don't think that's I personally think that we need to have this map amendment and clean things up. And leaving it the status quo, and I don't think really that anything else should be done until we get that done.
Mr. Chairman, I concur with that 100%. I think the more that we've looked into this issue, it definitely has gotten more complicated, and I'm glad that it has taken some time because of that. So.
Any other comments or questions for staff before we open the public hearing? Or further discussion?
I have a question because I got the letter and.
Sir, we're gonna open a public hearing here in just a second. You'll have your chance. We'll call you to the podium in just a second. We'll give you a chance to speak. Is there any other comments before we,
I have,
yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, I do agree that we definitely need to make sure that those residential areas are taken care of before we move forward with a text amendment to make sure that we're not putting anybody in that type of spot whenever they assumed that they were buying in a subdivision.
Thank you. Any other comments? That said, at this time, we'll go ahead and open up the public hearing, and Mr. Santinga, I believe you'd be the first one up, sir, if you'd like to come to the podium and state your name and magisterial district for the record, if you'd like to speak on this.
If I heard it right now, you just said you're not going to do anything about this right now.
If you would come to the podium, sir, so we can record that for the,
A little confused, came into Brandy Station in 1971. And we have a nice house there between two churches, the fire hall and Pine Wire. When I came in, I owned the property on Pine Wires. Now, and as time went by, and you know Fred, he finished school, and we set up a print shop right on our property. And I think we had it all zoned commercial. Now, the thing now it's 1.6 acres, what we own now. I sold that to Trolley, the other where Fine Wire is. Now, what I'm concerned about is the print shop's doing real well. I just rent it to a person right now. I ran it for a little while. Now, if he would want to expand, see, it's all on our property, the whole thing. The print shop is right up adjacent to the old fire hall. And so if he would want to build more space onto the building that Fred and I had built, how would this affect that? Because I have 1.6 acres, so I have quite a bit of acreage there, and we live on that, on about half of it. The other half, is where we built the building. But how would that be affected?
Get staff to elaborate on that if we could, Sam. Is that, his name, what was your, could you state your name and magisterial district for the record, Mr. Santinga?
My name is Philip Santinga. I live in,
Stevensburg, right, yep. Yeah.
so,
But,
Mr. Chairman, would you like to help me figure out what the specific
well, I
question
think your
is?
property now, Mr. Santinga, I believe is zoned commercial services, is that correct?
yeah,
It's
and our
CS.
house is on commercial. I think at one time, our house was residential, and then when we built the screen printing right on our property, I think right now it's all commercial, that whole area. Whole 1.6 acres.
Mr. Chairman, I think I know which parcel Mr. Santinga has. We've worked with him in the past, right in the heart of Brandy Station. He definitely is zoned CS today. And there are a couple different uses, including the house that's zoned CS, and it has been for quite some time. But that has not been an issue because that use is allowed as a by right use in the CS zoning today. So Mr. Santinga has been able to enjoy the residential uses and commercial uses actually on that property because I believe there was a garage at one time or a structure that
Yeah,
was
there's
used for
still a
commercial.
garage there.
Yes,
And I have a couple chicken houses too,
yes.
and I don't want them affected.
Commercial,
The
you're-
business,
you
right?
could-
Correct.
commercial
Print
end.
shop.
Probably
Yeah.
be great,
Yes, that's what his concern is.
probably be great to answer both. If he's saying that it's half and half, 0.8 acres residential, 0.8 acres commercial, would he be able to expand either under what we're proposing? And would there be either that he's not able to expand?
I'm not sure if there's two separate properties or not. I don't know that. But I know that there's one zoning for the property, I think is CS. If this moves forward, there would be restrictions moving forward for the residential component to do any additions to it based on the non-conforming, but not necessarily the commercial component.
But
I understand it, but it's okay.
Sam, if I, try to clarify this, if this was never even brought up and something happened to Mr. Santinga's house, he would still have to use non-conforming ordinance?
No, not today. Not today.
Okay. But as for the
Mr. Santiga may actually be in a rare situation where his property may be big enough where, and he has an existing commercial use, where he may be able to rebuild under the current ordinance, but he's going to be restricted to 25% of that acreage that he has today to build that home in, based on the way this code is written currently. And that does not exist today. He would be able to rebuild as is, even add to it, as long as he met his setbacks.
Okay, so if our house burns down, for instance, then I would have to cut my property for 25%?
Potentially, Mr. Santinga, if the board adopts it as written today, yes, sir.
Okay, so then what would happen to the print shop?
What would happen to what? I'm sorry.
The print shop that I'm renting on our property?
Nothing.
Nothing? That would
That's
stay
an
there?
allowed, yes, sir, that's an allowed
So
commercial
we'd have
use.
to split the property then?
No, you would not have to necessarily do that. You could do that, actually.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, thank you for
You're
your
welcome.
patience. I think I understand it.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else who'd like to come and speak? Yes, sir.
My name is Tom Ireland. I live in the Cedar Mountain District. I don't want to be redundant to what Mr. McLaren expressed so well, but I do live in Three Flags. I have a house there. My daughter has a house there. In addition to the problem of a house being destroyed and taking more than 2 years to argue with an insurance company and get it rebuilt, those are small lots. People would basically have to rebuild with a tiny house, is what they'd be up against. But there's other problems with it too. Being zoned as commercial property, if everybody here goes in a lottery pool and they quit tonight because they win, the new folks may come in and say, well, it's commercial property, we're going to raise commercial property taxes, and we'll be paying more than people 3 lots over from us. In the Three Flags neighborhood, there's 40 homes that are either zoned as CS or partially zoned as CS. If you look at the map, the line goes through 14 lots. Depending where you're standing in the yard, you're either on commercial property or residential property, and that's just kind of a mess. The other thing is the people in the south of here are going to find out that insurance adjusters are not their friends. So years ago, I had a hot rod. The insurance company needed to know the number on the engine, and they said if that engine was changed, something happens, they don't cover it at all. I did a little research, and I found out that if your home is on commercial property and it's not listed as commercial property, something happens, they can say, we're not covering that. It's not a residential area, and you're living in a house in a place, so you know we're not going to do that. So there's another hardship that these people face. And I agree that the answer to all of this is just to table the amendment to the ordinance until the map can be looked at and go through, for example, Three Flags, that's all residential. Change it to R3 so we have the same rights and responsibilities as everybody else in the neighborhood. And then maybe the other little places that are here and there, perhaps cover them by a case-by-case basis. And that's what I ask that y'all do.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else who'd like to come and speak on this matter? Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. My name is Colleen Keener, and I'm also in the Cedar Mountain District. I also live in Three Flags community, and prior to this, I had no idea that my house was in a commercial zone. Needless to say, when I got this notice, I was quite upset for numerous reasons. And so I am asking you tonight to table this and not approve this amendment. Not only will it reduce the value of my home and the potential of selling my home, but more importantly than that to me is I have been recently handicapped. And I was looking to add an addition to my home for accessibility reasons to maintain, to be able to stay in my home. And this, if passed, will prevent me from staying in my home. So I ask you, plead with you to please not pass this amendment, and preferably, certainly, to remove my home from commercial zoning. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else who'd like to come and speak on this issue? Yes, sir.
David Martin, Stevensburg District, and my topic is completely different than these others, which I'm very, very sensitive to after just finding out about it. At last month's Planning Commission hearing, two of my mission partners, Community Housing Partners and Habitat for Humanity, both spoke out in opposition to tonight's proposed ordinance amendment. These two represent a proposed project of approximately half, 25 acres and 200 units, of the area and residential entitlement of my parcel. As they mentioned, certain aspects of these proposed changes would adversely affect their ability, and more importantly, their flexibility to continue the partnership with me, the landowner, and other possible third parties. While I have no desire to pursue single-family detached, I do not support any restrictions on either multifamily or any form of affordable workforce or income-limiting housing. The prior and current text regarding concurrency, number 3 above, does not make sense. Furthermore, the 25% area limitation, and note that staff has indicated that this ordinance change does not restrict my density. I still have 400 units entitled. This area limitation limits what community housing and habitat are proposing, a diverse mix of housing with substantial area for amenities, including walking trails, outdoor activities, etc. I have been working on this affordable housing project for over 18 months in parallel but subordinate to the current rezoning application, and am optimistic that this team will be able to pull it off, size and scope still to be determined. We have an opportunity here to take a huge step in addressing Culpeper's across-the-board housing crisis, from transitional homeless to the high end of workforce housing, but we need to work together. We have an opportunity to leverage recent U.S. government offer to extend sewer and water from the airport to Warrenton Training 4. Last Friday, we had a sitting U.S. Senator surrounded by Culpeper's diverse housing advisory groups specifically addressing affordable housing. We have an opportunity to leverage federal infrastructure grants, possibly the carrot approach offered by Senator Warner. And we have opportunities to leverage the remaining acreage if the county so chooses. And in so doing, take a significant affordable housing load off of all of Culpeper's districts. I sincerely hope that this team, this project, can be part of the solution and not part of the problem. Multifamily and affordable are unquestionably compliant with the comp plan, and frankly, the CS zoning district is the only one that can meet Culpeper's affordable housing needs. Finally, my wife and I, who's here with me tonight, will undoubtedly be taking a significant financial hit by pursuing affordable, I'm almost done, affordable housing on at least half of this parcel in a time in our lives when we would certainly use those funds for other things. But most good things require hard work and sacrifice. I sincerely hope this board embraces this effort and votes unanimously to make no changes that adversely impact multifamily and affordable housing, and direct staff to work with my team to come up with the best possible use of this land. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Anyone else? Mr. Green?
Larry Green, Salem District. I had a long speech written out, but I think I can pretty much sum it up. The Planning Commission has turned us down twice. From what I heard tonight, your staff is recommending to leave it alone. So, you know, how many times somebody has to tell you something before you listen to them? You've heard people that it affects. Not only Three Flags, it's going to knock the value of their homes down and everything. There was a great man one time named Solomon. I've reworded this to not insult the board. Proverbs 12 and 15, the way of a man is right in his own eyes, but a wise man listens to counsel. The way of a man, you knew what the word was there, seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice. Men think their own way is right, but the wise man listens to others. One thing I learned, and one thing has been my success in becoming chairman of the Republican Party, I've got a good team of men behind me, and I listen to them greatly. I advise you to do the same thing. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Anyone else who'd like to come and speak on this matter? Mr. Haight?
Once again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Don Head, Stevensburg District. This meeting is a total waste of our time. Members of the Board of Supervisors decided to jump out of a plane and then halfway down check to see if they had a parachute. They simply didn't do their homework. Whose bright idea was this in the first place to strip our rights away? Taking our property rights away and masking it as trying to say Culpeper will not be allowed. This is just another willy-nilly attempt to seek changes past the Culpeper residents. If you want to make changes to any upcoming zoning, then that's fine, but you can't strip away current zoning rights. You can't change the rules in the middle of the game. The issue with schools is because the previous board members didn't do their job to protect Culpeper citizens. They failed to understand the long-term effects of their decisions. They failed to understand the totality of the effects that now you are making the same mistakes. The decisions you make today will affect my children and my children's children. Do I want more data centers here in Culpeper? The answer is no. Do I want more houses here in Culpeper and the impact it will have on schools, fire and rescue? The answer is no. What I hate more is people's rights to be stripped away. America is a prime example of a country that has stripped certain groups of people's rights away for centuries. History has shown that these aggressors were wrong in doing so, and in most cases, their personal enrichment and for personal gain. A wise man once said, quote, "Those who don't know their history will certainly repeat it by right development. A development that qualifies for a constitution without qualifying the discipline approved from local authorities. This is also known as the right of approval. By right development is granted when a development appraisal strictly conforms to zoning and building code. Bundle of rights, the legal entitlement that a property owner has over their property, possession, the right to own property, control, the right to decide what to do with the property, enjoyment, the right to use the property without unwarranted interference, exclusion, the right to decide who and cannot enter the property, disposition, the right to sell, rent, or transfer the property. For the last 8 years, you have been telling us that we have property rights. Now you are telling us that you want the power to grant us those rights or not. Let's be crystal clear to the members of the board that we want they want to strip our property rights away. No one of these will be negatively affected by their zoning changes, only the residents of Culpeper County. My name is Donald Haight Jr. I love Culpeper, and I'm here to stay. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Haight. Anyone else who'd like to come and speak on this matter? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and open this back up for discussion. Yes, sir, Mr. Deal.
So I guess I have a question for Sam. So Sam, can we leave the ordinance as is, and can we generate the map amendment simultaneously?
Yes, Supervisor Deal, that is an option.
To me, that looks like the right thing to do.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with Mr. Deal. Essentially, for those who are in subdivisions that have HOA restrictions that would like clarification as to zoning, such as Three Flags, Hawthorne Estates, et cetera, I 100% support us going through the map amendment process and clarifying if that's needed. The reason to do that would be in case this board or a future board chose to change the rights in commercial services. On the other hand, there are many homes in commercial services that are mixed use. We had people speak this evening. There are others who did not speak, where they may have historically been commercial, are now used residential, and maybe in the future could be best for one or the other. That's a complicated situation that covers many small parcels. I don't think that can be solved just by a zoning amendment and then addressing the rest of commercial services. So I'm all for the map amendment. I think we're going to step back, but after that, I hope we step back quite a bit. Thank you.
I just want to say, I mean, if we go right to the root cause, why was this even brought up? I can tell you that when we have the town of Culpeper with a lot of the approvals that they've granted with some of their developments, and the county doesn't have a say in this. And we talk about, one of the comments was made talking about the impact on services. And I really feel that when we're talking the developed lots, and I agree 100%, these ones that have R1 running through their kitchen and it's CS running through the living room, that needs to be fixed. And as the lady said about her house, she had no idea until she got this paperwork in the mail. So this definitely needs to be straightened out. But going forward, you know, the biggest concern I hear from my constituents is, you know, how are we going to pay for all this stuff? And when we're sitting here with our hands tied because it is now a by right use under a commercial zoning, a commercial services zoning, we don't have a say in it. It can be high density, 8 houses per acre. And if from what I've read and studied, there's 143 acres that are still undeveloped. And if you look at 8 houses per acre, I can tell you that right there is an elementary school. So I'm not trying to, you know, I would just like to have a say at the table when we're going forward with this thing and express to the applicant the impact that it's going to have by doing high-density residential. I remember in 2009, I had industrial property, and I got a letter in the mail that said, hey, you're not going to be able to do houses, period, on industrial. Well, that wasn't the highest and best use of that property anyway. I wasn't going to put houses on it. But again, I think as a board, we as a county would be better served to be in a position that we could at least have a stake in saying, hey, this is, letting the applicant know this is what's going to happen. This is how it's going to impact our services. It's going to impact our schools. It's going to impact our sheriff's office. It's going to impact our roads. And that's, to me, that's the driver behind this whole thing. So I do agree 100% that the first order of business should be that we straighten the map amendment and we get it to reflect where these houses are. And since my time on the board, you know, I've seen R1 with a segment of A1 right in the middle of it. I mean, I think really we need to get all of this stuff straightened out. But going forward, I really hope we don't make the decision tonight until we get this map amendment straightened out. So, I mean, that's my take on it.
Mr. Chairman, I believe that we've moved forward on this without doing all of our homework and being properly prepared. This information that sort of came to light for me was today. And I don't believe anyone on this board has the intent to keep properties that are in a subdivision zoned commercial services. That makes absolutely no sense. So it would seem to me that, first of all, we should change, we should study what this map is, we should make these changes, we should evaluate that, and fix this issue before moving forward. And I don't believe we should be voting on the rest of this change tonight. We should direct staff to analyze this, make the changes, figure out where we need to go, and then come back at a later time when that has been done and decide what we need to do.
I agree. So, Mr. Chairman, I will make the motion that the board direct staff to initiate the map amendment to address those parcels zoned CS but are used for residential only, and defer the text amendment until that is completed.
Second.
Point of order for our parliamentarian. If we're having a public hearing on adopting this or not, does that work? I mean, I'm okay if that does, but I would, because of the uncertainty, I would prefer that we not postpone the consideration of this. I would prefer that we re-advertise, go through a process. I agree completely with what Supervisor Dewar said. We need to get our ducks in a row, do the map amendment, and then consider what we want to do afterwards. So rather than deferring, I prefer that we end the public hearing, we do nothing relative to this advertised public hearing, and just instruct staff afterwards to go forward with the zoning amendment and follow the process from there.
Well, we have a motion and a second on the floor. I guess we would, unless Ms. Gugino would want to amend her motion. Did Dave? All right, so with the motion and a second, further discussion.
By deferring, we are creating uncertainty for the crew that's here. Now, we can choose to do so, but if the process is to be deliberative, I believe we're 100% consensus on map amendment, cleaning stuff up. After that, we ought to look what we should do after the map amendment, see what's left, the 143 acres that's undeveloped, the part that is developed, consider it comprehensively and get some staff recommendations and go through a deliberative process would be my strong recommendation.
Well, I've said all along that I'm not in favor and will not support a ordinance amendment. And I think the right thing to do is to support the Planning Commission with 7-2 vote, and to, at the same time, consolidate and generate the map amendment process. I hear that, we need to change this ordinance because it's going to affect schools, it's going to affect fire and rescue, it's going to affect this entity and that entity. Well, how about the landowners? How's it going to affect them? You've heard people here tonight talking, and I've heard other people talk at other meetings. And I have constituents that have called me before, not in my district, but from other districts. And they're very protective of homeowner and landowner rights. So is that not important? So I'm not going, you know, I don't want to defer the decision tonight because I feel strongly that the Planning Commission was a 7-2 vote. They turned it down twice. And the map amendment is needed. Sam says we can do it in consolidation. So I'm not going to support Ms. Gugino's motion.
I would just have a comment. When we're looking at a lot of these in an overall aspect of the comprehensive plan and zoning practices in general, we can build houses in agriculture. We can build houses in residential. We can build houses in commercial. We could build houses up until one point in light industrial. And you get to the point where we also have PUD where you can build houses. We get to the point where all of our zoning starts looking the same, and we need to differentiate and protect our revenue generating sources of commercial and industrial and separate out our residential and our agriculture, because a lot of those don't interact well. It's not really nice to have your backyard open up to the fertilizer plant at CFC. Like, it doesn't smell good, it doesn't sound good. There's reasons, as Mr. Rosenberger always says, that good fences make good neighbors. We have zoning in place to ensure that we don't have people having single-family homes next to a nightclub. We get constant complaints about different wedding venues and stuff with loud music. These type of changes protect those and those expectations of the residences. It also allows us to manage our growth, which manages what taxes we have to do. So yes, landowner A would get to build 8 houses per acre, but landowner B is going to have to bear that burden of the increased tax rate so that we can build new schools, so that we can have fire and rescue increased. So those are the reasons why we're going through this, to ensure that where the development is where it needs to be, where houses are where they need to be. Those are good zoning practices and all afforded to us by the state of Virginia's code. That is why we're going forward with this. And that is why I want to continue to keep this on the burner as we make sure that we're addressing all of these little situations that were allowed from other zoning. We haven't changed our zoning since the 80s. We need to start looking at this, whether we do a full comprehensive rezone or we do these piecemeal. I still believe in the betterment of the community and the betterment of all of our taxpayers, that these things still need to take place. And that's why I think we should do the map amendment first to ensure that we have a good base, and then revisit this when we're done.
Just to clarify, so if we defer tonight, then will that allow us to have more time to study the changes to the commercially zoned situation, give us more detail to come back and maybe have the chance to make a more informed decision, correct?
And I believe once the map amendment, Sam, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but once the map amendment is made, it will give a clearer picture of where we are with the parcels that we're talking about.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think that there's two areas where a map amendment does make sense, as I indicated earlier. There are a few others around the county, as Supervisor Underwood alluded to, that are not going to be as cut and dry. May result in some further analysis and consideration, either with the text itself or some other types of text amendments outside of the commercial zoning district text as well. So, but there's 3 flags and Hawthorne Estates, in my opinion. Those are in subdivisions. There's a mixing of zoning there. It makes sense for the subdivision to be all in one zoning type. I think that's the original intent, of those uses when they were established as well. In those cases, it makes good sense to amend the map. Beyond that, it's a little trickier. So.
Just to clarify one more time, Supervisor Underwood had made a point regarding the public hearing. If we come back to this, could you expand on that, please, Mr. Underwood?
If we defer this, since we've held a public hearing, we could actually go ahead and act without another public hearing, couldn't we?
I believe you would have the ability to do that, yes.
Yes. So in the purpose of having further public input and going through the process deliberately as Supervisor Dewar has suggested, I think the thing to do is to do nothing now, not defer, literally have staff look at the map amendment and cancel this, and then, once we look at the map amendment, have staff and Planning Commission and everyone work on what makes sense in a thoughtful and deliberative manner, with a lot of public input.
Sam, as for a planning aspect, what was being proposed tonight with the 25%? How is that gonna, would that help clarify when going forward with, when planning these developments? I mean, as it stands now, there is no, but you'd indicated there's not gonna be a decrease in density with this 25%. It's just, it's
Right.
basically clustering, if you would, to
Right.
developments.
Right, in theory, and in theory, this potential amendment works better with undeveloped property, right? So there's 143 acres, Mr. Chairman, as you alluded to, that does not have any type of development on it, commercial and/or residential. I think it'd be a lot easier to apply this ordinance to those situations as currently drafted. In those current situations of undeveloped property, it does not necessarily reduce the density outright, but it does force the picture on that you can only use 25% of that area or that land mass for residential uses only. So in reality, it could impact someone's density, but in theory, it does not. That's the best way that I can answer it. There's a lot that goes into development beyond just the initial density calculations. You got usable acreage for different things. You got setbacks that you have to involved, things like that, the land itself. But in theory, no, it does not decrease the density, but it does force the picture onto only a fraction or a quarter of the property. So,
Mr. Chairman, I think from what I'm hearing, the board is pretty well set that we need to review this map and we need to make some changes before anything happens. Question is how that next piece, the timing of it. So, Sam, and I know you can't give an exact number, but how long do you think it's going to take for staff to go through, look at these individual situations and come up with a recommended action? And then what is that action and what is once we decide what that action is, what's the timetable involved with that?
Mr. Chairman, to Supervisor Durr, I'll take the zoning map amendment process first. That process would take a minimum of 4 to 5 months. We do have to advertise that. That does require public hearings. That does need to be referred to the Planning Commission. It is a zoning map amendment. Beyond that, if the board continues to move forward with potential code amendments, there may be a need to readdress the language in particular situations like Mr. Santinga, and I'll use him just because he was here tonight. There may be an opportunity to look at the language to support those situations that are unique. Whether we can come up with that exact language, Mr. Chairman, to Supervisor Durr on this, I don't know. We attempted to move in a direction with the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission gave their recommendation. It is hard to capture in text every situation that's out there, so.
And I
So-
would,
I'm not trying to sound defeatist, but that's the reality that we're in there, so.
So the reality is, I'm hearing this, if we postpone this, we're postponing it for a 6-month period?
Supervisor
Possibly.
Durr, that would be my best guess at this
That's
point, yes.
that's an optimistic guess, probably. It would make sense to me that we take that 6-month period of time and figure out how this ordinance should be reworded and worked to fit. And that might make more sense than postponement. Because we're not going to do anything for 6 months anyway. So maybe we ought to look at it and try to get this right.
Well, how about I start with withdrawing the text amendment, and we'll just go forward with the motion on the map amendment, and then we can go towards the text amendment.
You'll amend the motion to move forward, to direct staff to move forward with a map amendment.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the amended motion, and so we need a second on that.
I would second that.
Call the question.
All right. So at that point, once this, are we going to revisit
Then we'll have to make a motion on the second part, because we
Okay.
still have the public hearing here. We have to
Okay, so we have
adjudicate
a
that.
motion and a second to move forward with a map amendment, direct staff to move forward with the map amendment. All those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 6-0. Okay, now, moving forward with the amendment that's on the floor that we've talked about.
So as far as the text amendment, I agree that once we get back to this, yes, it's going to be in 6 months. I want us to have a public hearing, whether it's a deferment with the knowledge of, that we will have another public hearing, or we go ahead and start this over from the moment that the map amendment is completed, as long as we revisit.
It would seem to me that we could have this process begin now. We don't need to wait 6 months to restart this process. We should take where we are, look at what has transpired, and work forward now, immediately.
But that would be restarting the process,
It
not
would be-
deferring, because they're already talking about text amendments and everything else. You would want to advertise public hearing, go through the planning commission, go through the whole process. I'm all for, actually, I think we're better leaving things alone, but if we're going to do it, let's at least do it right and be deliberative.
That's where I think we should be. We should begin that process now. We should look at it, and when this map is done in 6 months, then we can have a feeling of where we want to go.
Question for Ms. Weimer, if there is, I mean, that being the case, there really is no motion other than just to leave it.
Yeah, I mean, the motion would have to just be to not adopt the amendment at this point.
We don't even need a motion for that. We
No,
can just
I
not
mean,
adopt.
just not adopt. The thing I was going to say earlier is if there are going to be significant changes to the text that's there, obviously, my recommendation would certainly be that we would have to re-advertise and, you know, I don't know how that language is going to come out or how that's going to shake out at the end, but I think that's the best course forward.
Well, I agree with 100%. Whatever's done, bringing it back up would require another public hearing. And, you know, with what changes have been made and, you know, in light of transparency, I think that's the proper way to do this.
And I also share your concern with the 143 acres. I mean, as an owner at 7% of the 143, I still share the concern because there are consequences that could occur that we need to look at, and doing that in a deliberative fashion, I suppose.
Well, one of the biggest concerns I get from constituents is, you know, I don't have kids in school. Why am I having to pay for this development that you all just approved? Or why am I having to pay for these apartments that you're putting over here? You know,
Count me on the same page.
And I think that when we're, you know, trying to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars, I honestly think that we ought to have a say at the table instead of just saying, well, it's a by right use, anything under CS, you can do whatever you want. And I really don't think that's smart. So, and I'm not trying to.
I get where you are.
All right, So with that said, there is no action taken on the, on item 6.02.
Is no action taken the action we need to take? Sheila?
You can do that, yeah. I mean, if there's no call or vote, it just dies on the vine, basically.
Adjournment.
So moved. We're adjourned.